He picked the wrong man. That was the only thought running through the minds of everyone frozen inside the executive cafe of Sterling Tower. The moment they realized the quiet father nursing his coffee alone wasn't just some maintenance worker who'd wandered into the wrong room. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't moved from his stool, hadn't even set down his cup. But when the large man in the tailored suit grabbed that young woman by the arm and yanked her off her feet, the quiet father turned around slowly, like someone who'd already calculated every exit in the building before he'd sat down, and the room went very, very still. Before we go any further, if you've never been to this channel before, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now because we tell stories here that will keep you up at night. The kind with real tension, real consequences, and characters who surprise you when it matters most. Drop a like on this video and tell me in the comments what city and country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to that cafe, because you need to understand exactly who Logan Hayes was before you understand what he did next. Logan Hayes had a tell. It wasn't obvious. You wouldn't catch it unless you'd spent enough time around men who'd been in serious situations. But his daughter Cora had noticed it years ago, the way a 7-year-old notices things she can't quite name but files away anyway. Whenever her dad walked into a new space, a grocery store, a parking garage, a hotel lobby, his eyes did a quiet sweep. Not dramatic, not suspicious looking, just a slow, even scan, the way a person runs their hand along a wall in the dark. Checking, cataloging, moving on. Cora called it his thinking look. She said it made her feel safe. Logan didn't tell her what it actually was. He arrived at Sterling Tower on a Tuesday morning in early October, the kind of morning where the city felt like it was still deciding whether to wake up. The sky was the color of old pewter. A cold front had pushed through overnight, and the wind off the financial district had a bite to it that cut straight through his jacket. A navy canvas field jacket that had seen better days, worn at both elbows, the left pocket repaired with a strip of iron-on fabric that didn't quite match. He carried a battered leather messenger bag over one shoulder and a paper cup of gas station coffee in his hand because the hotel across the street charged $9 for espresso. And Logan Hayes was not a man who paid $9 for espresso. He was 37 years old, 6 feet even. Not the kind of physical presence that made people step aside. Not anymore. He'd lost some of the military bulk after he got out, the way most men did once the structure fell away. His face had lines in it now that hadn't been there at 30. His hair was dark and needed cutting. He had a small scar through his left eyebrow from a training accident in Coronado that had happened so long ago he sometimes forgot about it until someone asked. He looked, by most reasonable assessments, like a man who fixed things for a living. Plumbing, maybe. Or heating systems. Someone blue-collar and competent and faintly tired. That was fine with him. The consulting referral had come through a former colleague, a man named Garrett, who now worked private sector in New York and had more connections than sense, Logan always thought, but meant well. The job was a security assessment for a mid-sized tech company called Aurora Dynamics, headquartered on floors 22 through 26 of Sterling Tower. The CEO had flagged some concerns, vague ones, Garrett said. Suspicious activity around the building, possible surveillance. Someone had left an unsigned note on her assistant's desk 3 weeks ago that said simply, "You should consider your options." Logan had read the brief on his phone the night before while Cora finished her homework at the kitchen table. He'd reread it twice, the way he always did with anything that used the word suspicious, without being specific about what exactly was suspicious. Vague threat language usually meant one of 3 things: someone with too much imagination, someone with a grudge, or someone genuinely dangerous who was being careful about leaving tracks. The note bothered him. The phrasing of it. Consider your options. That was deliberate language. That was someone who understood the psychology of pressure, who knew that an implied threat left more room for fear than an explicit one, because the imagination fills in the blanks worse than reality ever could. He told Cora he had a job starting Tuesday. How long? She'd asked, not looking up from her math worksheet. Week? Maybe 2. Depends what I find. Will you be home for dinner? Every night I can. She'd nodded, accepting this the way she accepted most things about her father's work. Without complaint, without drama, with the quiet adaptability of a kid who'd been raised by a single parent and understood, without being told, that some things were just the shape of their life. Logan had stood in the kitchen doorway watching her for a moment, her dark hair bent over the worksheet, her sneaker tapping a slow rhythm against the chair leg, and felt the specific weight that came with raising a child alone. Not crushing, just present. The way a good coat feels on your shoulders in cold weather. You're aware of it, but you'd rather have it than not. He cleared the building's security desk at 8:47 a.m. and was directed to wait in the executive cafe on the second floor while his contact from Aurora Dynamics, the CEO's assistant, a young man named Daniel Park, came down to meet him. The executive cafe was the kind of space Logan immediately cataloged and filed. Open floor plan. Large windows facing the street. 2 exits, the main entrance and a service door near the back kitchen pass-through. 8 tables, 5 occupied. A marble bar counter running along the east wall where 2 baristas worked with quiet efficiency. A curved staircase in the corner leading up to the mezzanine level, currently unused. He took a stool at the end of the bar, angled slightly so his back wasn't fully to the room. He ordered a black coffee from a barista named Marcus. He saw the name on the tag. And he placed his messenger bag between his feet and waited. At 8:53, Victoria Sinclair walked in. He didn't know her name yet. He didn't know anything about her yet. He noticed her the way he noticed everything, not with particular interest, but with the baseline attention of a man who paid attention to movement. She came in through the main entrance, moving with the kind of purpose that suggested she was running slightly behind on something, but was too disciplined to actually rush. Late 20s, maybe 30. Dark blazer over a cream blouse, hair pulled back. She was on her phone, not talking, reading something, her jaw tight, the small muscle at the corner of it flexing slightly, the way it does when someone is working hard not to show they're stressed. She took a corner table near the windows and set her phone face down on the surface. She looked out at the street for a moment. Then she pulled a slim folder from her bag and opened it on the table. Logan looked away. It wasn't his business. He checked his watch. Daniel Park was 3 minutes late. Brandon Cross arrived at 9:01. Logan heard him before he saw him. The particular kind of entry that announces itself, heavy footsteps and a door opened with more force than necessary, the kind of entrance that says, "I don't need to knock because I own everything I walk into." Logan turned his head slightly, not enough to be obvious, and watched. Brandon Cross was a large man, not gym-built, but the kind of large that comes from a lifetime of physical confidence, of never being told to make himself smaller. He was somewhere north of 45, with the thick neck and blunt features of someone who'd played contact sports in high school and never emotionally left them. He wore a suit that was expensive in the way that men who want you to know a suit is expensive wear suits. A watch on his wrist that could have paid Logan's rent for 8 months. He had 2 men behind him who weren't quite bodyguards but were clearly there to fill space. He scanned the cafe once, and his eyes found Victoria Sinclair in her corner. "There she is," he said, loud enough that 3 tables turned. He wasn't talking to his men. He was performing. Logan went still on his stool. He kept his coffee cup at his lips, but he wasn't drinking. Victoria looked up from her folder. Something moved across her face. Not quite fear. More like the particular brace of a person who has been dreading a specific thing, and now it's arrived, and all the dread converts into a cold, flat readiness. She closed the folder slowly. "Brandon," she said. Not a greeting, a statement. Brandon crossed the cafe without being invited. He pulled out the chair across from her without asking and sat down, spreading himself into the space the way large men sometimes do. Shoulders wide, arms taking the table surface. The body language of someone claiming territory. "You haven't been returning my calls," he said. "I've had my attorney handle all communications from your office. That's pretty clearly been communicated." "Your attorney?" He smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant smile. "Victoria, I'm not a communication. I'm a conversation. There's a difference." "I know exactly what you are," she said. Her voice was steady. Logan noted that. The control in it. And the answer is still no. It was no 3 weeks ago, it was no last month, and it's no today. Aurora Dynamics is not for sale. Brandon leaned forward. "It's not really a sale we're talking about anymore, more of a transition, a reorganization." "I know what it is." "Do you?" He tilted his head slightly, the way a person does when they want to imply they know something you don't. "Because I've been looking at your Q3 numbers, sweetheart, and they're not inspiring confidence. The word landed like a flicked cigarette. Sweetheart. Calculated and deliberate. Victoria's jaw tightened once. You need to leave. I need you to be reasonable. I've asked you to leave my table. And I've asked you... He reached across the table suddenly and closed his hand around her wrist. Not a grab exactly, more of a grip. The kind of contact that makes a point without technically being violence. To think about what happens to a company when its leadership becomes a liability. Victoria tried to pull her arm back. His grip didn't give. Logan set down his coffee cup. He got off the stool without hurry. He crossed the 12 feet between the bar and Victoria's corner table at an even pace, not rushing, not hesitating, just moving. He stopped when he was close enough that Brandon would have to acknowledge him. Hey, Logan said. That was it, just that. One word, quiet, without inflection. Brandon looked up. His eyes moved across Logan, the worn jacket, the stubble, the gas station coffee, and his face did something dismissive and immediate. He had a category for men who looked like Logan, and he filed him there automatically. Back up, Brandon said. This is a private conversation. Let go of her arm, Logan said. Brandon stared at him for a moment. Then he laughed. Not entirely forced, but with an edge of performance to it, aware that there were now several people watching. Who are you? He said. You work in this building? You a janitor? Security? He looked Logan up and down his skin, with the deliberate, insulting leisure of a man who knew how to use looks as weapons. What, she call her handyman for backup? Logan didn't answer. He just stood there. His expression hadn't changed. Something about that, the stillness of it, the absolute absence of reaction, made Brandon's brow crease slightly. Just a fraction. The first crack in his performance. He released Victoria's wrist. There you go, Logan said, the same flat quiet. Brandon stood up. He was 3 inches taller than Logan and wider across the chest, and he used those inches with practiced ease, stepping into Logan's space. Behind him, his 2 men had moved closer. The cafe had gone almost silent. Marcus the barista had his hand near the counterphone but wasn't reaching for it yet. The trained uncertainty of someone who doesn't know if this is already over or just starting. You're making a mistake, Brandon said, low and close. A significant mistake. Probably, Logan said. Brandon's eyes narrowed. He wasn't used to that. The agreement. The casualness of it. It was the wrong response to intimidation, which meant it wasn't the response of someone who was intimidated. You know who I am? Brandon asked. I know what you are, Logan said, and the phrasing landed deliberately. An echo of what Victoria had said minutes ago, though Logan hadn't heard her say it and was arriving at the same conclusion through his own read of the situation. And I know you're going to pick up your jacket and walk out of here. Or what? Logan didn't answer that either. The silence stretched. Brandon stared at him. Then his right hand moved, down, behind his hip, fingers working at something on his belt with the casual misdirection of a man who'd planned this moment. And Logan saw it before anyone else in the cafe did. The collapsible steel baton caught the overhead light for half a second as it snapped open in Brandon's hand. What happened next lasted less than 4 seconds. Logan moved left, outside the arc of the swing. His left hand caught Brandon's extended wrist, not stopping it, redirecting it, using the momentum already committed. His right hand went to Brandon's elbow, a joint lock applied with precise, practiced pressure, rotating the arm against its natural articulation. The baton hit the floor. Brandon's forward momentum carried him into the edge of the corner table, which rocked hard but didn't tip. Logan kept pressure on the joint, walked Brandon down to a controlled position against the table's surface, chest down, arm up and behind him, and held him there. The whole thing was almost quiet. No impact sounds except the baton clattering on tile. No shout from Brandon because Logan's palm was briefly cupped over his mouth for the first second. The instinctive control of a man trained to contain sound in environments where sound meant death. Then Logan stepped back, released him. Brandon straightened up, breathing hard, his face red, his eyes doing something strange, cycling through humiliation and anger and a new thing that was almost like recalibration, like a computer restarting after an unexpected shutdown. Logan picked up the baton from the floor. He walked back to the bar and set it on the counter beside his coffee cup, without any particular ceremony, as if he'd just picked up something someone had dropped. He sat back down on his stool. The cafe did not move for several seconds. Then Marcus the barista quietly picked up the counterphone and called building security. One of the occupied tables in the back had a woman with her phone out who had clearly been filming. A man near the entrance was already moving toward the door, pulling out his own phone. Victoria Sinclair sat at her corner table with her hand wrapped around her own wrist, the one Brandon had grabbed, and she looked at Logan across the room with an expression that wasn't gratitude exactly. Not yet. It was something more complicated than that. The look of a person who has just watched someone reveal themselves to be an entirely different thing than they appeared. Logan picked up his coffee. It had gone lukewarm while he was gone. He drank it anyway. At the cafe entrance, Brandon Cross hadn't moved. He was still standing beside the corner table with his jacket askew, staring at Logan's back. His two men had gone very quiet behind him. "You have no idea," Brandon said, finally, his voice flat and stripped of performance now. "What you just walked into." Logan didn't turn around. "Daniel Park," said a voice from the staircase, and Logan looked up to see a young man in his mid-20s coming down with an expression of someone who had arrived 15 minutes late to something and could already tell the situation had gone sideways without him. I'm so sorry, Mr. Hayes, the elevator held me up. He stopped when he saw Brandon Cross. He stopped again when he saw the baton sitting on the bar counter. His mouth closed. "Morning," Logan said. Daniel looked at him, at Victoria, at Brandon, back at Logan. "Is there—" He cleared his throat. "Is there anything I should know about before we start?" Logan considered the question seriously. "Probably a few things," he said. Outside, the October wind pushed against the building's glass face, and somewhere on an upper floor, a security feed was recording nothing, because somewhere in the previous 40 minutes, someone had quietly disconnected 3 of the building's exterior cameras and 2 of the lobby feeds, and the only person in Sterling Tower who might have thought to check that before sitting down for his coffee hadn't been given the chance. But Logan Hayes was thinking about it now. And that meant Brandon Cross's carefully prepared Tuesday morning had just started going wrong in ways he hadn't planned for. Daniel Park had the specific energy of a person who was very good at his job and had just walked into a situation his job description had not prepared him for. He stood at the bottom of the staircase for a moment, his leather portfolio clutched against his chest, looking between Logan and Brandon Cross with the expression of a man mentally rewriting the next hour of his morning. Then he straightened his jacket, walked to the bar, and took a stool 2 seats down from Logan without being asked. "Coffee," he told Marcus. "Please. Whatever's fastest." Marcus, who had been moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who processed stressful situations by focusing on tasks he could actually control, had a cup in front of Daniel inside 30 seconds. Brandon Cross hadn't left. That was the thing Logan had already noted. The fact that Brandon was still standing beside Victoria's corner table with his jacket straightened and his jaw set, watching Logan with the particular stillness of a man who was recalculating rather than retreating. His 2 men had repositioned themselves near the cafe entrance. They weren't blocking it exactly, but they were aware of it. Victoria had stood up from her table. She'd gathered her folder and her phone, and she was now standing a few feet from Logan's end of the bar, not close enough to suggest she was sheltering near him, but not far enough to suggest she wasn't. She was looking at Brandon with an expression. Logan was starting to read, that flat, controlled readiness she defaulted to under pressure, the lid held tight on whatever was actually moving underneath. "You should go," she said to Brandon. "Building security will be here in under 4 minutes. You know that." "I know exactly how long building security takes," Brandon said. "I've been in this building longer than you have, Victoria." "Then you know they keep incident logs." Brandon smiled. It was the kind of smile that doesn't reach anywhere near the eyes. "They do," he said, "which is going to be very interesting, because from where I'm standing, you're associate." And the word carried a particular weight of implication. "Just assaulted me without provocation, in front of witnesses." The cafe, which had been holding its collective breath since the baton hit the floor, shifted slightly. Logan heard a chair scrape, felt the subtle change of atmosphere that came with people reconsidering what they thought they'd seen. "He had a weapon," Victoria said. "I had a personal safety device," Brandon said, smooth and immediate, like he'd already rehearsed the phrasing, "which I carry legally. and which your man grabbed from me before I could identify myself to building security. He turned his attention to Logan for the first time since sitting back down. What's your name? Logan looked at him. I'm going to need your name, Brandon said, for the police report. Logan Hayes. And what's your role here, Logan? Security consultant. Brandon repeated it slowly, letting the words sit. Security consultant. He looked Logan over again, so the worn jacket, the gas station coffee, the messenger bag with its iron-on patch. And this time the look was different, less dismissive, more deliberate, like he was constructing something rather than just observing. Independent? That's right. So you're not employed by Aurora Dynamics? Not yet. Brandon nodded. Something settled in his expression. The recalculation had landed on something, and whatever it was, it satisfied him. Okay, he said, quiet and almost pleasant. He picked up his jacket from the back of Victoria's chair. He'd draped it there without asking, Logan now realized, another small territorial move, and he put it on with the calm of a man who'd decided the conversation was over because he'd gotten what he needed from it. Okay. He looked at Victoria one last time. I'll be in touch, he said. Through my attorney. He smiled again. Sure. He buttoned his jacket. Tell your consultant to get a lawyer. Then he walked out, his two men falling in behind him, and the cafe exhaled. Building security arrived at 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Logan timed it out of habit. Two men, mid-40s, the kind of security presence that was mostly decorative, good for managing lost visitors and the occasional domestic dispute in the lobby. They took a brief statement from Marcus the barista, noted the baton Logan had set on the counter, and called up to their supervisor. One of them asked Logan if he'd been involved in the altercation. Logan said yes. The man wrote something on his tablet and told Logan not to leave the building. Daniel Park watched all of this with his coffee cup held in both hands, like it was something he needed to hold on to. So, he said, finally, when the security men stepped away to consult with each other. You haven't actually started yet. No, Logan said, and this already happened. Yes, Daniel nodded slowly. Ms. Sinclair is going to want to talk to you. I figured. Victoria had already looked at Logan twice in the last 90 seconds with the specific expression of someone composing what they wanted to say. She was still standing near the bar, her folder under her arm, her phone in her hand with the screen dark. When Daniel said her name, she walked over, and she stood across from Logan with 2 feet of marble counter between them and looked at him directly. Thank you, she said. I want to say that first before anything else. Thank you. You're welcome. That man has been a problem for 6 weeks. What just happened? The baton. She stopped. Reset. I wasn't expecting that. Neither was he, Logan said, but he knew he could use it. That's why he brought it. She looked at him for a moment. What do you mean? He brought the baton to this meeting. A collapsible baton is not something you carry on your belt at a business meeting unless you plan to introduce it. He came here knowing there was a chance he'd need to establish dominance physically, and he came prepared. Logan paused. He also knew the building's camera coverage, his positioning in here, where he stood, where his men stood. He stayed out of the primary sight lines. The corner table you were sitting at doesn't have direct camera coverage from the lobby feed. Victoria's expression shifted. Not surprise exactly, but the specific quality of attention that sharpens when you start connecting dots you'd seen separately before. How do you know where the camera sight lines are? She asked. You've been in this building for... She checked her watch. 20 minutes. 18, Logan said. I looked when I came in. Force of habit. He picked up his coffee and found it was genuinely cold now. He set it back down. I'd recommend checking the building's external feeds from this morning. The ones covering the main entrance and the street-level parking on the east side. Why? Because if I'm right about how much he planned this, some of them won't be working. The look she gave him then was different from anything she'd shown him yet. Not quite trust. It was too early for that, and she was too careful a person to extend trust on 18 minutes of acquaintance. But it was the look of someone who had just reassessed the category they'd placed someone in and wasn't sure where the new category was yet. Daniel, she said, without looking away from Logan, call facilities. Ask them to pull the camera status log from the last 2 hours. Already on it, Daniel said, phone to his ear. The police arrived 40 minutes later, which was faster than Logan expected and probably had something to do with Brandon Cross having called them first. There were two officers, a detective named Voss and a uniformed officer whose name Logan didn't catch. Voss was a woman in her mid-40s, compact and unhurried, with the particular quality of stillness that came from a career of walking into rooms after things had already gone wrong and learning to read what was left behind. She looked at Logan the way Logan had looked at the cafe when he came in. Quick, thorough, professional. She interviewed Logan at a table near the back of the cafe, away from the remaining staff and the two Aurora Dynamics security people who'd come down from upstairs after Daniel called up. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "walk me through it." He did. Plainly, chronologically, without editorializing. He described Brandon's entrance, his approach to Victoria's table, the grip on her wrist, his own involvement, the baton. He told her he'd set the baton on the bar counter. He told her approximately where Marcus the barista had been standing. Detective Voss wrote things down with a mechanical pencil on a small notepad, the old-fashioned kind, and Logan found that detail oddly reassuring. "Mr. Cross's statement," she said, carefully neutral, "describes the situation somewhat differently." "I figured it would." "He says you approached him aggressively while he was in a private business conversation. He says he produced the baton in self-defense and that you then assaulted him and took the baton by force." Logan nodded. He would say that. "You don't seem particularly concerned about it." "There were witnesses." Voss looked up from her notepad. Something in her expression suggested she was about to say something she wasn't going to enjoy saying. "Mr. Hayes, I want to be straightforward with you. Mr. Cross's attorney has already filed a complaint, formally, as of about 20 minutes ago." She set her pencil down on the notepad with a quiet click. "The complaint names you specifically. It alleges unprovoked assault resulting in physical injury. He's claiming a wrenched shoulder from the joint lock. And it suggests the possibility that you were placed here specifically to intimidate a third party in an ongoing business dispute." The cafe was quiet enough that Logan could hear the espresso machine 24 feet away. "His shoulder will be fine," Logan said. "That's not really—" The woman behind the table near the window was filming on her phone. The man who left through the front entrance right after it happened had his phone out. "Marcus?" He nodded toward the barista, currently wiping down the counter with the focused attention of someone who badly wanted to be invisible, was reaching for the counter phone when it happened. He had a clear sight line. Logan paused. "Also, the baton is still on the counter. It has his prints on it. If he's claiming he produced it in response to my approach, the angle it would have been in when I redirected his arm," he made a small, brief gesture with one hand illustrating the arc, "doesn't support that story. The physics of the joint lock are inconsistent with him simply holding it." Voss looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up her pencil again. "You know a fair amount about incident documentation." "I've written a few," Logan said. "Different context." "Military?" "Navy." She wrote something down. "How long?" 12 years. Last 6 with a special operations unit." She looked up again. She didn't ask which unit. People who knew, Logan had found, generally didn't need to ask, and people who didn't know wouldn't understand the answer anyway. "Okay," she said, and her voice had shifted slightly. Not warmer, but with a different quality of attention. "Here's where we are, Mr. Hayes. I believe you. I want to say that clearly. But Mr. Cross has filed first. He's named you specifically, and my department has to process that regardless of what I personally think happened. I need you to stay available. Don't leave the city." "I wasn't planning to." "And get a lawyer." It was the second time he'd heard that in the last 40 minutes. "That's the second time someone said that to me this morning." "Then you should probably take it seriously," Voss said. "Well." Daniel pulled him aside near the cafe staircase after Voss left, holding his phone out to show Logan the message on screen from facilities management. 3 external cameras had gone offline between 8:20 and 8:35 that morning, the 2 covering the east entrance and 1 on the second-floor mezzanine overlooking the cafe interior. The maintenance log showed no scheduled downtime. The technician who'd checked on them an hour later found them physically intact but with their network connections severed at the junction box. "Someone was in the building," Logan said. "Before you got here," Daniel said. "Before Brandon Cross got here." "Do you have a guest log from this morning? Anyone who accessed the building between 7 and 8:30? I already asked. Facilities is pulling it. Daniel looked uncomfortable, which was becoming his default expression. Ms. Sinclair wants to meet with you upstairs. She said. He hesitated. She said to tell you she's sorry for what you've been pulled into. Those were her exact words. Logan looked at the staircase. Then he looked at the bar where his cold coffee still sat on the counter, and the baton beside it, now sealed in an evidence bag a uniformed officer had produced from his car. She didn't pull me into anything, Logan said. This is the job. Daniel nodded, unconvinced, and led him upstairs. Aurora Dynamics occupied the kind of office space that managed to feel both impressive and functional, not the performative excess of companies that wanted you to notice their success, but the considered investment of a company that thought carefully about how space affected the people who worked in it. The floors were polished concrete, the walls were real brick from the building's original structure, and the workstations were arranged in clusters rather than rows, which Logan noted because it implied a preference for collaboration over hierarchy. The people working at those stations ranged from early 20s to somewhere around 50, and most of them looked up when Logan came through with Daniel and then looked back at their screens without the rubbernecking that sometimes happened when something newsworthy had occurred on a lower floor. Disciplined team, Logan thought, or a team that trusted their leadership enough not to perform anxiety when things went sideways. Victoria's office was at the north end of the floor, glass-fronted but with a privacy screen that could be activated from her desk. She was standing when they came in, not behind her desk but near the window, one arm folded across her stomach and the other hand at her mouth, reading something on her phone. She lowered the phone when Logan entered. "Sit down," she said. "Please." He sat in one of two chairs across from her desk. She didn't go behind the desk. She took the other chair, which he noted. People who sat behind desks in their own offices were usually communicating something about the dynamic they wanted to establish. People who came around in front of them were either genuinely collaborative or had learned to perform collaboration convincingly. He didn't know yet which Victoria was. "Brandon Cross has had people watching this building for at least 6 weeks," she said. Not overtly. "A car on the street rotation, different vehicles. I noticed it because I'm here early. I get in around 6 most mornings, and after the 3rd week I started recognizing patterns." She paused. "I should have told you that in the brief." "You didn't know who I was yet," Logan said. "I knew you were the consultant Garrett recommended. That should have been enough." She set her phone face down on the arm of the chair. "The note on my assistant's desk 3 weeks ago. Consider your options." I had it analyzed. Clean paper, no prints, laser printed from a font so common it's untraceable. But the paper had a specific weight and coding that's consistent with a commercial printing service. We found 3 such services within 2 miles of this building. She looked at him. "I was going to tell you all of this when you came upstairs. I just didn't expect you to come upstairs under these circumstances." "What exactly did Brandon want?" Logan asked. Victoria let out a short, controlled exhale. "Aurora Dynamics has developed a security architecture platform, infrastructure-level software for managing data access across large organizations, financial institutions, healthcare systems, municipal infrastructure. We're 2 quarters away from a licensing agreement that could be worth north of $400 million. Brandon Cross runs a private investment group that has, we discovered this through our own due diligence in the last month, been acquiring controlling positions in similar companies through a combination of aggressive buyout offers and, when those fail, manufactured crises that tank the company's valuation." She paused. "I wanted me to bring him in as a majority stakeholder at a price that was about 30 cents on the dollar. He framed it as a partnership. And you said no." "I said no, and I hired outside counsel, and I filed a complaint with the Financial Regulatory Board, which I think is what escalated the surveillance." She looked at Logan directly. "He came here this morning to scare me into compliance. That's all it was supposed to be. I don't think he was supposed to grab my wrist. I think that was him losing his temper when I didn't react the way he expected." "He had the baton," Logan said. "I know." She said it quietly. "I know." Logan leaned back slightly in the chair. "The camera's going down this morning. That wasn't improvised. He had someone in the building before either of us got here. He planned to create an incident he could control the narrative around. The baton was for intimidation first, and if he needed to use it, he wanted the room's security feeds dark when he did." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "So what happened was exactly what he wanted." "Up to a point," Logan said. She looked at him. What point? He didn't plan for me. The thing that moved across her face then was complicated. Something between grim recognition and the specific particular exhaustion of a person who had been managing threats alone for a long time. No, she said. He didn't. There was a knock at the glass door and Daniel leaned in. Detective Voss is calling back. She says the footage from a phone, the woman at the table, is being reviewed, but she's got a problem. She's saying one of the witnesses in the cafe. He looked at his notes. A Mr. Alan Ferris. He's changed his statement. He's now saying he saw you approach Brandon Cross first. The office went quiet. Logan did a brief internal inventory of the room, where Alan Ferris had been sitting, his sightline, how long he'd been in the cafe before the incident. He'd been at the table closest to the entrance, close to Brandon's men. Was Ferris alone at his table? Logan asked. Daniel blinked. I don't know. Find out, Logan said, and find out if anyone talked to him between when it happened and when the police took his statement. Daniel disappeared. Victoria was watching Logan with the steady quality she'd shown from the beginning, like someone who was processing quickly and didn't want to miss anything by reacting too fast. He intimidated a witness, she said, already. Possibly. Logan kept his voice even. Or Ferris had a pre-existing relationship with Cross's people. Either way, it happened fast. That's not improvised either. That's someone with a plan for what to do if things didn't go the way he wanted. His phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. He pulled it out. Unknown number, local area code. He showed the screen to Victoria without saying anything. She shook her head, didn't recognize it, and answered. Hayes. There was a pause on the line, then a man's voice he didn't know, calm, professional, utterly without warmth. Mr. Hayes. I'm calling on behalf of a client. I'm an attorney. My client is prepared to resolve this morning's unfortunate incident quietly, without involving further legal processes, in exchange for your immediate termination of the consulting arrangement with Aurora Dynamics and a signed statement confirming that today's incident was the result of a personal misunderstanding. Logan waded through this. If you decline, the voice continued, my client will pursue every available legal avenue. Given that you are a single parent with full custody of a minor child, and that a criminal charge, even a pending, unresolved one, can have significant implications in family court proceedings, my client trusts that you'll understand the weight of what's being offered. The line went quiet, waiting. Logan looked out Victoria's window at the October skyline, at the city laid out in its ordinary morning business. He thought about Cora at her kitchen table, her sneaker tapping against the chair leg. Tell your client, Logan said, that I'll take the second option. He ended the call. Victoria had heard enough of it from across the desk. Her expression had gone somewhere past controlled into something harder and colder underneath. He threatened your daughter, she said. He threatened my custody arrangement, Logan said, which is the same thing. Logan, I need to see your corporate archive, he said, the secured one, specifically anything related to Brandon Cross's approach over the last 6 weeks. Correspondence, financial documents, whatever you have. Why? Because that's what he actually wants. Whatever's in there is the leverage he doesn't want in your hands. Logan stood up. And before the end of today, I need to figure out whether it's still there. He walked to the office door, stopped, looked back at her. The phone call was meant to scare me off, he said. But you don't use that kind of pressure first, the custody angle, the criminal threat, unless you're worried. He's worried about something. He paused. Whatever it is, it's in that archive. He didn't wait for her to respond. He went out into the Aurora Dynamics floor, where 24 people were trying to have a normal Tuesday morning, and Logan walked through them with his worn jacket and his empty hands, and the particular focused calm of a man who had just accepted that this was no longer a simple assessment job, and who was fine with that, because some things were worth the cost of being fine with them. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a local number he recognized, Cora's school. He stopped in the middle of the office floor and answered. Mr. Hayes? A woman's voice, the school secretary. This is probably nothing, but there's a man outside the school this morning who has been parked across the street since drop-off. He hasn't approached anyone, hasn't done anything, but 2 of our staff mentioned him, and our policy is to notify parents if something seems off. Your daughter is completely fine. She's in class. I just wanted you to know. Logan was already moving toward the elevator. Don't let her leave the building, he said. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The man outside Cora's school was gone by the time Logan got there. That was almost worse than if he'd still been sitting there. Logan drove the perimeter of the block twice before parking. An old habit, the kind that had saved his life more than once in contexts he didn't think about anymore if he could help it. The car the school secretary had described, a dark blue sedan, had left a gap in the street parking across from the main entrance where it had been sitting. Logan got out and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking at that gap, the way you look at the space where something used to be. Inside, he found Cora in her fourth-grade classroom, sitting at her desk with a workbook open in front of her, her sneaker doing its unconscious tap against the chair leg, a streak of blue marker on her left hand from an art project that had apparently happened before he arrived. She looked up when he appeared in the doorway, and her expression moved through surprise and then immediately into that particular version of children's concern, the look that's not quite fear but is fear adjacent, the look that says, "Why are you here when you're not supposed to be here?" "Hey, Bug," he said. "Why are you here?" "Wanted to check on you." She looked at him the way she'd been looking at him since she was about 5, like she was deciding whether to accept the surface version of what he'd said or push through to whatever was actually underneath it. She'd gotten better at that push as she'd gotten older. It was one of the things about her that made him proud and nervous in equal measure. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "No, just wanted to see your face." She studied him for another moment, then she looked back at her workbook. "You're doing your thinking look," she said. He stayed for 20 minutes. He spoke with the principal, a serious man named Alvarez, who took Logan's concern at face value and agreed to add a staff presence near the front entrance for the rest of the week. Logan didn't tell him everything. He told him enough, that he was involved in a consulting matter that had generated some friction with a third party, and that he wanted the school aware in case anything unusual occurred. Alvarez looked at him carefully. "Should I be worried, Mr. Hayes?" "I don't think so," Logan said, "but I'd rather have told you than not." He went back to his car and sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel, the engine idling, watching the school entrance in his mirror. The ordinary machinery of a Tuesday morning, kids arriving late, a crossing guard adjusting his vest, a mother hurrying back to her car with an empty lunchbox her kid had forgotten. All of it painfully normal. His phone showed 2 missed calls from Victoria and one from a number he didn't recognize. He called Victoria back first. "The archive," she said before he could say anything. "It's been accessed." He kept his voice even. "When?" "Sometime between yesterday evening and this morning. The access log shows a remote login at 2:17 a.m. from an IP address that routes through 3 proxy servers. Whoever did it knew what they were doing. The folder that was accessed contained everything I'd compiled on Brandon Cross's acquisition history, financial records, a documented pattern of what looks like extortion across 4 previous companies." She paused. "It's not gone. The files are still there, but they've been copied." Logan thought about this. "They want to know what you have before they decide how to move." "That's what I think too." Another pause. "There's something else. Daniel found out about the witness, Alan Ferris. He's a contractor who does facilities work for 3 buildings in this district. One of those buildings is a property management company that Brandon Cross's investment group has a stake in. Ferris isn't on payroll exactly, but he's done enough work for cross-adjacent businesses that he's in the network," Logan said. "Yes." "So the change statement was coordinated." "It had to be." Logan leaned his head back against the seat. Outside the windshield, the crossing guard was helping a small kid with an enormous backpack navigate the crosswalk with what appeared to be genuine good humor about the whole enterprise. Logan watched this without really seeing it. "What I said this morning about the archive, I need to go through it. Everything Cross's people accessed, not to read what they read, to understand what they're most worried about." "I know, that's why I called." Victoria's voice had that quality it got when she'd already made a decision and was informing him of it rather than asking his opinion. "I'm giving you full access, unrestricted, whatever you need." "Has Detective Voss been told about the archive breach?" "I called her before I called you. She's sending someone from their cyber unit." "Good." He started the car. "I'm coming back." I was halfway back to Sterling Tower when the second unknown number called again. This time he answered immediately. "Mr. Hayes." A different voice from the attorney this morning. Older, rougher-edged, with a cadence that suggested a man not accustomed to spending much time being careful about what he said. My name is Marcus Reed. I'm a detective with the Financial Crimes Unit. I've been looking at Brandon Cross for about 14 months. Logan said nothing and let the man continue. I heard about this morning, Reed said. Voss is a colleague. She told me who you were, what happened in the cafe. I looked you up. A brief pause, the kind that suggested he'd looked Logan up thoroughly. I'd like to meet with you today if you can manage it. Not at the precinct. Somewhere quiet. Why not the precinct? Because Cross has relationships in this building that I'm still mapping, and until I know exactly which relationships those are, I'd rather not broadcast that I'm talking to people connected to Aurora Dynamics. Logan processed that. A detective running a 14-month investigation who was worried about who was listening inside his own precinct. That was either paranoia or it was the specific, careful paranoia of someone who'd already watched a case get compromised once. He thought about the archive breach, the camera disconnections, the speed with which Brandon's attorney had called that morning, the architecture of what Brandon Cross operated, the infrastructure beneath the visible surface of it. 2 o'clock, Logan said. There's a diner called Carver's on Merchant Street, about 6 blocks from Sterling Tower. I know it, Reed said. I'll be there. So. When Logan got back to Aurora Dynamics, he found Victoria at her desk with her laptop open and a yellow legal pad covered in her own handwriting beside it. Dense, looping notes that she'd apparently been making since they spoke. She had a habit, Logan was starting to understand, of converting anxiety into documentation. She didn't pace and she didn't catastrophize out loud. She wrote things down. It was a trait he respected because he recognized it. Daniel brought coffee that was actually good this time, real coffee, from Aurora's kitchen on 23. And Logan sat at the small conference table in Victoria's office and went through the archived files for 2 hours. What was in there was significant. Brandon Cross's acquisition pattern, laid out across 4 companies over 6 years, was not subtle once you knew what you were looking at. Each case followed a variation of the same structure. Initial approach with a low buyout offer framed as a rescue, refusal by the target company, escalating pressure through manufactured reputation damage, regulatory complaints filed by proxies, and in 2 cases, staged incidents designed to create legal exposure for company leadership. In one instance, a CEO named Gerald Huang had faced assault charges that were later dismissed, but by the time they were dismissed, his board had lost confidence in him, and the company had accepted Cross's revised offer at 60 cents on the dollar. In another case, a female founder named Reyes had found confidential customer data from her company apparently leaked to a competitor, data that had actually been accessed through a third-party vendor with ties to Cross's investment group. The pattern was consistent and patient. Cross didn't rush. He applied pressure in layers, waited for the accumulation of it to do its work, and moved in when the target was already destabilized. He's done this before, Logan said. Victoria looked up from her own section of the files. 4 times that I can document, probably more that I can't. Gerald Huang, the assault charges. She nodded. That's why I think this morning wasn't improvised. The baton, the disabled cameras, the witness. He's run a version of this before. He knows what works. Logan sat back. He rubbed his face with one hand, the gesture of a man who hadn't slept as well as he should have and was running on coffee and purpose. The difference, he said, is that with Huang, the staged incident came after the company was already partially destabilized. With you, he's moved faster. He's escalating. Because of the licensing agreement, Victoria said. We're closer to it than any of his previous targets were. Once that agreement is signed, the company's value locks in at a number he can't afford to buy at. He has a window. And I walked into it this morning. She looked at him. You didn't do anything wrong. I know I didn't, Logan said. But I'm in the window now, and so is Cora. He said it flatly, without heat, the same way he'd say the weather had turned. It was a fact he'd already processed and incorporated, and being emotional about it wouldn't make it more or less true. But Victoria heard the weight under it. He could tell by the way she went slightly still. Logan, what I need to focus on, he said, is what specifically was copied from this archive. Because they didn't copy everything. They accessed one folder, the cross-acquisition history file, which means they either already have copies of the other material or they're not worried about it. The question is why the acquisition history is what they wanted. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Because it's the one that shows the pattern, she said. The one that would matter to an investigative body, or a jury. And if they have a copy of it, They know exactly what you know, which means they know how much of it is provable and how much is circumstantial. Logan looked at the legal pad, at Victoria's dense, looping notes. Are you working with anyone outside your attorney? Any regulators, investigators, anyone official? She hesitated. 1 second too long. Victoria. There's a detective from Financial Crimes, she said. We've spoken twice, informally. His name is Marcus Reed. Logan looked at her. He reached out to me 6 weeks ago, she said, right around when the surveillance started. He'd seen my regulatory complaint against Cross, and he asked if I was willing to share documentation. She paused. I haven't told my attorney yet. I was going to. Reed called me an hour ago, Logan said. I'm meeting him at 2. The silence that followed was the particular kind that comes when two people realize they've been circling the same point from different angles and have just now found the middle. Marcus Reed was a black man in his early 50s, with a gray-threaded beard and the physical build of someone who'd been large in his youth and had settled into a solid, quieter version of it. He wore a jacket that had seen better days, not as bad as Logan's, but in the same general tier of professional pragmatism. And he was already at a back booth in Carver's when Logan arrived, with a cup of coffee and a folder on the table in front of him, and the look of a man who'd been running on institutional friction long enough that he'd stopped expecting the institution to make it easy. He stood when Logan came in. They shook hands. You're not what I expected, Reed said. What did you expect? Private security consultant usually means retired cop or ex-corporate. You're neither. No, Logan said, and slid into the booth across from him. The diner was quiet at 2 in the afternoon. A handful of other tables. A waitress who knew Reed well enough to bring Logan a coffee without being asked. The kind of place Logan liked, functional and honest about itself. 14 months, Logan said. What do you have? Reed looked at him for a moment, deciding. Then he opened the folder. Cross's investment group operates through a network of 7 LLCs, 3 of which are incorporated in states with minimal disclosure requirements. The money coming into those LLCs from certain investors, he slid a page across the table, has flagging characteristics consistent with structured placement, meaning someone is cycling money through Cross's fund in amounts and patterns designed to avoid triggering automatic reporting. Logan looked at the page. He wasn't a financial investigator, but he'd spent enough time doing security work for corporate clients to read what he was looking at. He's laundering money. We think so. We can't prove it yet because the LLC structure creates enough distance that the paper trail requires warrants at 3 different jurisdictional levels, and every time we get close to one of them, something happens. Reed tapped the table once with 2 fingers, a restrained version of frustration. 6 months ago, a junior analyst in my unit who was working on the LLC trace had her apartment broken into. Nothing taken, but her personal laptop was accessed. We found remote access software installed. She hadn't reported it, hadn't told anyone. I found out because she came to me 2 weeks later and told me she thought she was being followed. He paused. She wasn't wrong. You pulled her off the case. I moved her to a different assignment, yes, and I stopped filing formal case updates in the department system. Reed looked at Logan directly. Which brings me to why I wanted to talk to you privately rather than through channels. Someone in your department is feeding Cross information. Reed didn't confirm it directly. He looked down at his coffee cup. I don't know that for certain. What I know is that case-sensitive information about my investigation has twice appeared to be known by Cross's people before it should have been. That's either a leak or a coincidence, and 14 months in this business has made me very poor company for coincidences. Logan thought about the speed of that attorney's call this morning, the specific detail about his custody arrangement, his full custody arrangement, which wasn't public information and would have required someone to either dig into court records or have access to a background check run through official channels. The call I got this morning, Logan said, Cross's attorney. He knew I had full custody of my daughter. That's not in any public record. Reed looked up. Background check, Logan said. Pulled through official channels. Within a few hours of this morning's incident. Reed's jaw tightened slightly. He wrote something on the margin of his folder page. That's useful, he said, and his voice had gone quiet and controlled in the way of someone who was very angry but had a lot of practice keeping it out of his voice. That's very useful. They sat for a moment. The diner hummed around them. What I need from you, Reed said, is access to whatever Victoria Sinclair has compiled on Cross's acquisition history. She mentioned she had documentation. She has it. I've seen it today. It's detailed. Logan paused. You should also know her archive was remotely accessed last night. The acquisition history file specifically. Reed was very still. Cross's people have a copy of what she has, which means they know what she knows, and they know what's provable and what isn't. That changes their timeline, Reed said. It changes everything, Logan said. They'll move faster now. They can't let her get to a formal investigative body with documented evidence before they neutralize the source of it. He paused. Which means Victoria is in more danger than she was yesterday. Reed nodded once. He closed his folder. I want to bring this to a formal investigation, properly, but I need to do it through federal channels instead of my own department, and that takes time I'm not sure we have. How much time? Reed looked at him. Days, maybe. A week if we're unlucky. Logan looked out the diner window at Merchant Street, at the ordinary Tuesday afternoon traffic, taxis and delivery trucks and people who had no idea what was happening 3 blocks away in a tower with a fractured security system and an archive that had been quietly raided in the night. He thought about Gerald Huang, dismissed charges, destroyed confidence, lost company. He thought about Reyes and her leaked customer data. He thought about the pattern, the patience and the layering of it. And he thought about the fact that Brandon Cross had run this 4 times before and walked away clean every time. What do you need from me right now? Logan asked. Stay close to Sinclair, Reed said. Don't let her make any moves without running them through you first. And if anything changes, anything, call me directly, not the main line. This number. He slid a card across the table with a handwritten number on the back that was different from the number on the front. That's my personal cell. I'm the only one who answers it. Logan pocketed the card. He picked up his coffee and finished it. He'd been running on cold and gas station caffeine for most of the day, and he could feel it now, the specific fatigue that came not from physical exertion, but from sustained, unrelenting alertness, the wired exhaustion of a body that has spent 12 hours deciding whether everything around it is a threat. He was almost to the diner door when Reed called after him. Hayes. Logan turned. Reed was still in the booth, his folder closed in front of him. The attorney who called you this morning, the custody angle. He paused. That's personal. Cross doesn't go personal without a reason. He went personal with you on day 1, which means he's more worried about you specifically than he should be about someone he just met this morning. He let that sit for a second. Think about why that might be. Logan thought about it on the walk back to Sterling Tower. He was still thinking about it when his phone rang at 4:47 p.m., and Victoria's name appeared on screen, and when he answered, the quality of the silence on the other end, just the half second before she spoke, told him something had happened. The files, she said, the acquisition history, the physical copies in the secured archive on 24. What about them? They're gone. Someone came into the building this afternoon during the shift change in building security. They had a badge. We don't know whose yet. She paused. Logan, they're gone. Every hard copy, the digital backups on the internal server, wiped. The archive is clean. Logan was on the sidewalk outside Sterling Tower. He looked up at the building's glass face, at the 26th floor where he could see, at this distance, nothing at all. The copy you shared with Reed, he said, is that still intact? Yes, he has it. Don't tell anyone else that. Okay. Don't tell your attorney. Don't tell Daniel. Nobody. A pause. You think someone... I think the speed of this means they have a timeline and we're in it, Logan said. Go to your office, close the privacy screen, and don't leave the building until I'm back upstairs. 20 minutes. He was already inside the lobby, already moving toward the elevator bank, when his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. 4 words. Check your garage. Tonight. He stood in the lobby with its polished floors and its ordinary Tuesday afternoon foot traffic and the elevator chiming for an incoming car. And he stared at those 4 words, and he felt, not fear exactly, because he'd learned in 12 years of operating in environments where fear was a liability to convert it into something more useful. What he felt was the cold, clarifying recognition of a man who has just realized the ground under him is different than it was this morning. He texted back. Who is this? No reply came. He didn't expect one. When he got to the garage that night, his own garage, at the small house in the Millhaven district where he and Cora had lived for the past 3 years. He found a sealed manila envelope tucked behind the wheel well of his truck. Inside it were printouts, financial documents, documents that matched precisely the formatting and header structure of the files that had just gone missing from Aurora Dynamics' secured archive. His name was written on several of them in blue marker, in handwriting that wasn't his. He stood in his garage with the overhead light buzzing its slow flicker and the October cold coming in under the door, and he understood what he was holding. He understood it completely, in the way you understand something you've seen a version of before and hoped you'd never see again. Someone had framed him, and they'd done it while he was 2 miles away in a diner talking to a detective, which meant they'd been watching him long enough to know exactly when he would and wouldn't be home. He put the documents back in the envelope. He did not touch them more than he already had. He took 4 photographs of the envelope in place behind the wheel well before he moved it. He bagged it in a large Ziploc from the kitchen. He called Reed from the driveway with the garage door still open behind him. Reed picked up on the second ring. Hayes. "I need you at my address," Logan said. He gave the street and number. "Tonight. And bring whoever you trust most. That list might be short." "It is," Reed said. "What happened?" Logan looked at the bagged envelope in his hand. "He moved faster than a week," he said. Reed arrived with a woman named Carla Diaz, a forensic specialist from the Federal Financial Unit he'd apparently already been quietly coordinating with. She was brisk and professional and wore blue latex gloves before she'd fully stepped out of the car, which Logan appreciated. She photographed the envelope in situ before touching it, photographed its contents, and ran a preliminary check on the documents while Reed and Logan stood in the driveway in the cold. "He's escalating because of the archive breach," Logan said. "They copied what Victoria had, knew she could potentially take it to a federal investigation, and now they're trying to neutralize the threat by making me the story. If I'm under investigation for stealing and leaking corporate documents, everything else, the morning incident, the baton, the witness, gets reframed around that." "It also gets your custody complicated," Reed said. "That's the point." Logan's breath made small clouds in the cold air. "If I'm fighting a family court proceeding and a criminal investigation at the same time, I'm not a useful ally to Victoria. I'm a liability. She distances herself from me, or her board forces her to." "And she's isolated," Reed said, "the way his other targets were isolated." "She's not going to distance herself," Logan said. He said it with a certainty that surprised him slightly, because he'd only known her for 12 hours and certainty about people usually required more time than that. But he'd watched her all day, under pressure from Cross in the Café, under pressure from the archive breach, under the accumulated pressure of 6 weeks of surveillance and threat. And she hadn't moved. She'd gotten more organized. "But they'll try." Diaz came back from the garage. She peeled off one glove and typed something on her phone. "The documents are forgeries," she said, without preamble. "Good ones. But the metadata on the printing is going to be interesting. The paper's the same weight and coating as the originals, which means whoever produced these had access to samples." She looked at Logan. "Someone was in Aurora Dynamics' physical space at some point before today. Not just the remote archive breach last night. Before that, to acquire paper samples." Logan thought about the camera disconnections, about Brandon arriving at precisely 9:01 a.m., about the badge used to access the secured archive on 24 that afternoon. "Cross has an inside contact at Aurora Dynamics," Logan said. Reed and Diaz looked at each other. "We need to get Victoria out of that building," Reed said. "No," Logan said. "If she disappears from the building, Cross knows we've identified the breach and he changes his approach. We need him to think this is working." He looked at the bagged envelope. "I need to be the one who appears to be isolated and under pressure, not her." Reed studied him. "That's a significant personal risk." "I know what it is." "Your custody." "I know," Logan said. Quieter this time, and with a restraint in it that wasn't anger so much as the compressed weight of a man who had already run the math on this and accepted what the math said. "I know exactly what it is." Diaz had been typing rapidly on her phone. She looked up. "I can have a federal preservation order on what Reed has within 24 hours. That protects the evidentiary copy. If we can get testimony corroborating the forgery—" "There's a witness," Logan said. He'd been turning this over since his conversation with Reed at the diner. The man who changed his statement, Ferris. He was in that cafe. He saw what actually happened. Whatever crosses people have over him or offered him, the fact that he was there, and the fact that there's phone footage that partially corroborates my account, puts him in a difficult position if he's formally deposed. He paused. There's also the barista, Marcus. He had a direct sight line, and he hasn't changed his story. Marcus is the one consistent witness, Reed said, which means he's also the one who's going to start receiving pressure next. Logan's phone buzzed. He looked at it. A text from Victoria. Someone from the building just called my personal cell. Said they had information about what happened in the archive. Said they saw something. Logan replied immediately. Do not meet this person alone. Do not confirm anything about what we know. I'll call you in 2 minutes. He looked at Reed. There may be a witness inside Aurora Dynamics who saw something related to the archive access. Or Cross is sending someone to find out what Victoria knows. Both could be true, Reed said. Both could be true, Logan agreed. He called Victoria. She answered on the first ring, and he could hear the particular controlled tension in her breathing, the sound of a person maintaining composure through the sheer force of having decided to. Tell me exactly what they said, Logan said, word for word. She told him. The call had been from a woman, she said. She'd identified herself as a cleaning staff member named Diane, who worked the afternoon shift on floor 24. She said she'd seen a man using a badge to access the secured archive room around 3 p.m. She said the man had a bag. She said she thought it seemed wrong but didn't know who to tell. Did she leave a number? No, she said she'd call back. Logan stood very still in his cold driveway. A cleaning staff member who saw something wrong but didn't know who to tell, who somehow obtained the personal cell number of the CEO rather than calling building security or HR. Who called, described what she saw in enough detail to be credible, and then declined to leave a callback number. Victoria, he said carefully, don't do anything until you hear from me. If she calls back, keep her talking as long as you can and text me immediately. Do you understand? You think she's real, Victoria said. It wasn't a question. I think there's a chance she saw something real, Logan said. I also think there's a chance she's been told to call you. And I can't tell you yet which one it is. He ended the call. He looked at Reed across the driveway. We need to find Diane, he said. Cleaning staff, afternoon shift, floor 24. Tonight. Reed already had his phone out. I'll call the building's facility contractor. Quietly. Always, Reed said. Logan went inside to check on Cora, who was doing her homework at the kitchen table again, her sneaker tapping its slow rhythm, a half-eaten apple beside her workbook. She looked up when he came in. She looked at his face. You're doing the thinking look again, she said. Yeah, he said. He sat down across from her, in the chair he always sat in the kitchen of the small house they'd shared for 3 years. He looked at his daughter and felt the familiar weight of it, that coat on the shoulders, familiar and necessary. Bug, he said, I need you to do something for me. What? I need you to go stay with Mrs. Pham next door for a few days. Cora put her pencil down. She looked at him the way she looked at things she was deciding whether to fight about. She was 9 years old, and she had her mother's eyes and Logan's stubbornness, which was a combination that had made parenting her both the hardest and most clarifying thing he'd ever done. How many days? She asked. I don't know yet. A few. Is it because of the job? Yes. She was quiet. She picked up her apple and took a bite, chewing slowly while she continued to look at him with that direct, assessing look. Okay, she said finally, but you have to call me every night. Every night, he said. I promise. She went back to her homework. He sat there a minute longer than he needed to, just watching her, and then he went back outside to where Reed was still on the phone, and the October dark had settled in completely, and somewhere in the city Brandon Cross was pulling threads and watching to see what unraveled. Diane was real. Reed confirmed it at 9:40 that night. A woman named Diane Solis, 41 years old, 11 years with the building's contracted cleaning service, afternoon shift on floors 22 through 25. Her supervisor described her as reliable, quiet, never a problem. She hadn't come in for her evening shift. She hadn't called out. She wasn't answering her phone. Logan was sitting at his kitchen table when Reed called with this. The house already quiet because Cora was next door at Mrs. Pham's with her backpack and her homework, and the specific resigned dignity of a 9-year-old who has accepted an inconvenience she didn't cause. Logan had walked her over himself, stood in Mrs. Pham's warm front hallway for a minute, listening to the sound of the television and Mrs. Eham offering Cora hot chocolate, and then he'd walked back across the dark yard feeling the particular cold that has nothing to do with temperature. "She's missing," Logan said. "She didn't take anything from her apartment," Reed said. "Neighbor saw her leave around 4:30 with just her purse." "Normal," the neighbor said. She waved. She looked fine. 4:30. The archive had been accessed at 3. Diane had called Victoria at approximately 4. She'd left her apartment at 4:30 and hadn't been seen since. "The timeline," Logan said. "She saw something she wasn't supposed to see. She called Sinclair, probably from a building phone or a personal cell we're tracing now. And someone either followed her or was watching her, and the moment she made that call..." Reed didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "Cross has her," Logan said, a pause. "We don't know that for certain." "Marcus," Logan kept his voice flat. "He has her. And if he has her, he'll use her. That's what the pattern says, the Reyes case, the Huang case. He doesn't eliminate problems. He converts them into leverage." Another pause, longer. Reed processing the same arithmetic Logan had already run, which means he'll reach out to Sinclair. "Tonight or tomorrow morning," Logan said, "before we can move on the forgery evidence, before Diaz gets the preservation order. He needs to force a decision before the legal structure closes around him." "What kind of decision?" "Victoria surrenders the remaining documentation and agrees to his terms. In exchange, Diane goes home." He could hear Reed breathing on the other end. The controlled, careful breathing of a man who'd been working this case for 14 months and was watching it accelerate past the pace he'd planned for. "I need to call Sinclair," Logan said. "Logan." Reed's voice had shifted, less the professional register, more something underneath it. "If Cross reaches out and makes that demand and she goes to meet him, she won't go alone. The moment you show up with her, every frame he's built around you gets used. You're still under pending investigation. If you're present at any kind of confrontation, I know." "Do you?" Reed said. "Because what I'm describing is the end of your custody arrangement, not a complication. The end of it. A pending assault charge, evidence of stolen documents found in your garage, and now direct involvement in a hostage negotiation that goes sideways? No family court in this state keeps a child with..." "Marcus." Logan's voice was quiet. "I know." The line held silence for a moment. "Get some sleep," Reed said. "I'll have eyes on Sinclair's building overnight. If Cross makes contact, we'll know." Logan said goodnight and ended the call. He didn't sleep. He sat at his kitchen table with the lights low and a cup of coffee that went cold untouched, and he did what he'd always done in the hours before a situation resolved itself one way or another. He ran through it. Not the emotional architecture of it, not the fear or the anger or the specific sick weight of having his daughter's name in the mouth of a man like Brandon Cross. He ran the operational structure. What Cross had. What Cross needed. What Cross was most afraid of. What the next move looked like from inside his head rather than from the outside looking in. By 2 a.m., Logan had arrived at a conclusion he didn't love but couldn't argue with. He texted Victoria. "He's going to contact you, probably early morning. When he does, don't agree to anything immediately. Tell him you need 2 hours to gather the documents. Text me the moment you hear from him." The response came back in under a minute, which told him she was awake too. "Okay. Are you all right?" He looked at the question for a moment. It was a small thing, 2 words, genuinely meant, and it caught him slightly off guard in the way that small, genuine things sometimes do when you've been operating in a headspace where everything is threat assessment. "Fine," he typed. "Get some rest if you can." He put the phone down and looked at the dark kitchen around him. The apple Cora hadn't finished was still on the counter. He picked it up and threw it away and washed the one dish in the sink, because there was nothing else useful he could do at 2 a.m., and doing nothing physical made him feel like the walls were getting closer. Brandon Cross contacted Victoria at 6:18 in the morning. Not a call. A message sent through an encrypted platform to her corporate email. The kind of platform that strips metadata and origin data, the kind that someone uses when they've learned through experience to keep distance between themselves and anything that could be recorded. The message was 4 sentences. I have someone who works in your building. She's safe and will remain safe. Bring the remaining documentation, all physical copies and any external backups, to the Aldrin Industrial Complex on Porter Road by 9 p.m. tonight. Come alone. Victoria forwarded it to Logan at 6:19. She forwarded it to Reed at 6:20. Logan called Reed at 6:21. He put it in writing, Reed said. That was the first thing he said, not surprise in his voice so much as the recognition of something significant. He put a kidnapping demand in writing on an encrypted platform. That's confidence. That's someone who believes he controls the situation completely. Or someone who's made a mistake, Logan said. Same thing sometimes. The Aldrin Complex. Logan had already looked it up. A decommissioned industrial park on the east side of the city, 3 blocks of former manufacturing and warehouse space that had been partially redeveloped and then stalled when a financing arrangement fell through 2 years ago. Large structures. Limited sight lines from the street. Multiple entry points. Difficult for a police perimeter to cover cleanly without being seen from inside. He knows the location, Logan said. He picked it for a reason. He's probably been inside. We need to move on this carefully, Reed said. If I bring tactical support, and he has Diane in there, and it goes wrong, it won't go wrong, Logan said. A pause. Logan, I need to be inside before Victoria gets there. He said it plainly, the way he said things that weren't negotiable. Not with her, before her. I need enough time to locate Diane and get her out of whatever position he's put her in before Cross realizes the situation has changed. Reed was quiet for long enough that Logan could hear traffic in the background. Reed was already up, already moving. If you go in there and something happens, Reed said, I can't protect you legally. You understand that. The pending investigation, the planted evidence, all of it becomes exponentially worse if you're involved in whatever goes down inside that building tonight. I understand. Your daughter. I understand, Marcus. Quieter this time. Final. I need you to trust me to do this the right way. Not the violent way, the right way. Another long pause. What do you need? Reed said. The day was the longest Logan could remember in recent years, and he'd had some long ones. He met with Diaz at 9 a.m. and confirmed the federal preservation order had been secured on Reed's copy of Victoria's documentation. The forgery evidence from Logan's garage was in federal custody. The paper analysis had come back with trace fiber evidence suggesting the documents had been produced using a commercial printer on the same floor as Aurora Dynamics' executive suite, which narrowed the inside contact considerably. Diaz had a name by noon, a man named Patrick Holt, junior facilities coordinator, hired 8 months ago with references that were, upon re-examination, impeccably fabricated. Holt was not at work that day. His apartment was empty. His phone was off. Logan sat with Victoria in her office at 1 p.m., while Reed briefed them both on the tactical arrangement he'd been able to assemble through his federal contact. A small team, 4 people, all federal, none from the local department, Diaz included. They would stage outside the Aldrin complex at 7:30, establish covered positions at 2 of the 4 entry points, and wait. Victoria listened to all of this with her hands folded on her desk, her legal pad in front of her, and the expression she got when she was processing faster than she was speaking. He'll have people inside, she said, when Reed finished. Probably 2 or 3, Reed said. Cross doesn't work with large teams. Too many people means too many potential witnesses. Diane, Victoria said, where is she most likely to be? Interior space, away from windows, somewhere he can control her movement without physical restraint becoming visible. Reed paused. Ms. Sinclair, I want to be direct with you. When you arrive tonight, Cross is going to want to see the documents before he releases her. He's going to want to control that exchange in a way that gives him time to confirm what he has and remove it before anyone outside can respond. That gives us a window. A window for what? Victoria said. To get Diane out, get you out, and close the building around him. Victoria looked at Logan. And you. Logan met her eyes. And me. You're going in early. Yes. She held his gaze for a moment. There was something in her expression, not argument, but the look of a person working through the implications of something they've already decided to accept. What are the odds this goes the way you're describing? She said. Logan thought about the honest answer. Reasonable, he said. If he's as confident as that message suggests, he won't be expecting a problem before you arrive. His attention will be on the exchange. On you. He paused. He's spent the last 2 days thinking about you. That's where his focus is. You mean he's underestimated you, Victoria said. Most people do, Logan said. The jacket helps. She looked at him for one more second. Then she looked back at Reed. Tell me exactly what you need me to do. Logan entered the Aldrin complex at 7:04 p.m. through a ground-level service door on the north face of the largest warehouse structure, a door that Reed's federal contact had confirmed was unsealed as of that afternoon, which in itself told Logan something about the level of preparation Cross had put into the site. You don't leave a door unsealed unless you're planning to use it, or you're so confident in your control of the space that a single unsealed door doesn't concern you. The interior was what he expected. Vast and dim, the last of the October daylight coming through high clerestory windows and pale, inadequate bars. The warehouse space had once processed industrial equipment of some kind. There were anchor points in the concrete floor and ceiling gantry rails overhead, most of the machinery long since removed. The smell was old metal and settled dust and the specific cold of a building that hasn't been heated in 2 years. Logan moved along the north wall in the shadows cast by a row of steel support columns, his footsteps careful and slow, his eyes adjusting and scanning. He found Diane Solis in 15 minutes. She was in a partitioned office space at the northeast corner of the warehouse, a room with actual walls rather than just open floor, probably a former site manager's office, with a door that had a padlock recently added to a hasp someone had screwed into the frame. Through the small wire glass window in the door, Logan could see her sitting in a folding chair, her arms free, not visibly restrained. She had a bruise on her left cheekbone that hadn't been there that morning. She was awake, and she was watching the door with the particular terrified alertness of someone who has been sitting in a room alone for several hours with too much time to think. Logan scanned the perimeter before he approached the door. He identified 2 of Cross's men, one positioned near the main warehouse entrance on the south wall, one up on a metal catwalk overlooking the floor. The one on the catwalk had a sightline to most of the open floor, but not to the northeast corner where the office was. The one at the south entrance was watching the entrance. Neither of them was watching the north wall. He worked the padlock for 90 seconds with tools he carried in his jacket's inner pocket. Small, unglamorous tools. A tension wrench and a short hook pick. The kind of thing that had no tactical glory to it but worked on cheap hardware locks consistently. This padlock opened. He eased the door. Diane saw him, and her whole body jerked, the reflexive terror of a person who has been waiting for the bad thing to walk through the door. He held up one hand, flat and still, and put a finger to his lips. She stopped moving. She was breathing hard and shallow. He crouched to her level and kept his voice at the lowest register that would still carry. My name is Logan Hayes. I work with Victoria Sinclair. I'm going to get you out of here, but I need you to move quietly and do exactly what I tell you. Can you do that? She looked at him. The assessment a person does when they've been betrayed enough times in the last 12 hours, the trust is a significant act. Whatever she found in his face, after a moment she nodded once. Good, he said. Stand up slowly. He moved her back along the north wall the way he'd come in. She was steadier than he expected. She stumbled once on a raised section of concrete and caught herself without making a sound, which told him she was the kind of person whose nerve held when it needed to. He got her to the north service door and passed her to Diaz, who was positioned outside with one of the federal team members, and Diaz had her away from the building in under 30 seconds. Logan went back inside. He had not planned this next part with Reed. He had told Reed he would get Diane out and maintain a position for surveillance until the team moved in. What he had not told Reed was that he intended to be in a position where Cross couldn't move Victoria to a secondary location before the team breached, which meant he needed to be on the warehouse floor when Victoria arrived, which meant he needed Cross to be unaware of him for approximately another 40 minutes. He found a position behind a steel machinery housing near the center of the floor, with sight lines to both the main entrance and the elevated catwalk. He settled in. He controlled his breathing and his heart rate with the same practiced attention he'd applied to waiting in worse places than this. A cold warehouse in October was nothing compared to some of the dark and damp he'd waited in over 12 years of doing things he didn't talk about anymore. He'd been in position for 22 minutes when Cross arrived. He came in through the south entrance with 2 additional men Logan hadn't identified from outside, making 4 total plus Cross himself, which was more than Reed had estimated. Logan revised his mental map of the space and what that meant for the federal team's entry points. He sent a single text to Reed's number, 5 inside. Revise east entry. The response was immediate, confirmed, hold. Cross moved through the warehouse with the specific confidence of a man on his own ground, hands in the pockets of his overcoat, head up, scanning the space with the proprietary ease of ownership. He said something to one of his men that Logan couldn't hear from this distance. The man went toward the northeast corner, toward where Diane had been. Logan watched him go, watched him reach the office door, find the padlock open, hanging loose on the hasp. The man stood there for 2 seconds. Then he turned and called across the warehouse. One sharp word, Cross's name, and the quality of the space changed immediately. Cross moved fast for a large man, crossing to the northeast corner, looking at the open padlock, looking at the empty room. Logan watched him take stock of what wasn't there. Cross turned to his men. He said something terse and controlled, and 2 of them began moving through the warehouse space in the systematic pattern of a search. Logan stayed still. The man on the catwalk above had come alert, shifting his position, looking down at the floor. His angle covered the center south of the space. Not the center. Not the machinery housing. The searchers moved east to west along the south portion of the floor. They had flashlights now, and they were working the shadows. Logan measured the distance to the nearest support column, 8 feet left, and the time he had before one of the search patterns reached the machinery housing, roughly 4 minutes, maybe 5. His phone buzzed once. Reed, Victoria ETA 12 minutes. You have a problem? Logan typed one word. Working on it. He moved. Not fast. Fast creates noise, and the warehouse's concrete floor was an amplifier. He moved with the deliberate economy of someone who had rehearsed this particular geometry of risk before, in different buildings with different stakes but the same fundamental math. He reached the support column. He took a position behind it. The catwalk man had shifted left and was now looking at the section of floor Logan had just vacated. Cross had positioned himself near the main south entrance, which told Logan he was doing the thing Logan had expected, pulling his attention back to the primary concern, which was Victoria's arrival. The open lock, the missing woman, these were problems. But Victoria arriving with the documentation and then leaving again without Cross having secured what he came for was a worse problem. Logan could see Cross weighing this from across the floor. Even at 40 feet in dim warehouse light, the body language was readable. Cross made his decision. He sent one man to continue the sweep and recalled the others to positions near the entrance. Whatever had happened with Diane, he was proceeding with the exchange. Logan was 4 minutes and approximately 60 feet from the main entrance when Victoria's headlights appeared through the warehouse's south-facing clerestory windows. He used those 4 minutes to move along the west wall, behind a secondary row of columns, to a position 20 feet from the south entrance. He could see Cross clearly. He could see the 2 men flanking him. The third was still sweeping the northeast section of the floor. Victoria came in alone, which was what they'd agreed. She had a leather document case under her arm, real enough looking from a distance, and Logan knew from their planning that it contained blank paper topped with 2 actual documents Reed had approved sharing for the purpose of making the case look legitimate. She walked in with that same flat composure Logan had watched her maintain through everything since Tuesday morning, and Cross looked at her the way a man looks at something he thinks he's already won. "Victoria," he said. "I'm here," she said. Steady. "I want to see Diane. She's comfortable. I want to see her." Cross smiled in the way he smiled. "After we've confirmed what you've brought." Victoria didn't move toward him. She stood where she'd come in, the document case under her arm, and looked at him across the warehouse floor. "That's not the arrangement. The arrangement is whatever I decide it is." "Then I'll leave," Victoria said, "and you can explain to whoever comes looking for Diane why she called me from a building I own before she disappeared." Cross looked at her for a long moment. Logan watched him, watched the calculation, the reassessment, the decision. Cross was a man who'd run this play 4 times before, and each time the person across from him had eventually bent. He was waiting for the bend. "You haven't changed," he said. "You know that? 6 weeks of this, and you still walk in here like it's a board meeting." "It's not a board meeting," Victoria said. "It's a mistake. Yours." And then Logan stepped out of the dark. He walked into the edge of the light without hurrying, from Cross's left, far enough that Cross saw him in his peripheral vision before he could fully react. One of the men by the entrance moved. Logan tracked him and held up the same flat, still hand he'd shown Diane an hour ago. "Don't," Logan said. Cross turned. Something moved across his face, not quite surprise, but the particular recalibration of a man who has just added a new variable to an equation he thought he'd already solved. "Hayes," he said. His voice was careful now. The performance quality was gone. "You're not supposed to be here." "I get that a lot today," Logan said. "You have no idea what you're doing," Cross said. "You have a pending investigation, stolen documents found in your house. If you're here, the documents in my garage were forgeries," Logan said. The paper fiber analysis traces back to a commercial printer on the Aurora Dynamics executive floor. The man who used it is named Patrick Holt. The federal unit that's been building a case against you for 14 months has that analysis in a preservation order as of this morning. Cross went very still. Logan kept his voice even. "The surveillance footage from this building's exterior is being pulled tonight by that same federal unit. Diane Solis is already outside with federal agents. The encrypted message you sent to Aurora Dynamics corporate email this morning has been forwarded to those agents and constitutes a documented kidnapping demand." He paused. "And Detective Marcus Reed is outside this building right now with a team that is waiting for my signal." In the silence that followed, Logan could hear the building's metal frame adjusting minutely in the cold. The small, patient sounds of old structures that have outlasted everything people put inside them. Cross stared at him. The stare of a man cycling through options and finding the doors closed one by one. Then something shifted in his face. The thing Logan had been watching for. The thing that happened when a man ran out of calculations and arrived at something rawer underneath. He reached into his overcoat. Logan moved before the gun was fully out. Not toward Cross, but toward Victoria, his left hand finding her shoulder and pushing her hard behind the nearest concrete support column, his body turning to put himself between her and the angle of fire. The shot was loud in the warehouse space, a flat crack that hit the concrete above the column and sent fragments singing past Logan's right shoulder. He felt the second thing a fraction of a second later. Not the impact exactly, more a sudden burning line across the top of his left shoulder, below the collarbone. The specific sensation he'd felt once before in a context he didn't think about anymore. Grazing. He cataloged it and set it aside. He pulled Victoria lower, behind the column's base, and pressed his phone's side button twice, the signal he and Reed had agreed on. The south entrance came apart 4 seconds later. The federal team came through 2 entry points simultaneously, the sound of it filling the warehouse like a pressure change, voices and boots and light. Cross's men made the specific, immediate decisions of people who understand the math of armed federal officers versus their current situation. They put their hands up. All 3 of them, within seconds. Cross ran. Not toward the exits, which were covered. He ran into the interior of the warehouse, into the dark of it, the instinct of a man who'd always managed to find a way through the closing walls. Logan heard him before he saw him. The heavy footsteps on the catwalk stairs, Cross taking them fast, making for the elevated walkway that spanned the warehouse's upper section. Logan came around the column. His shoulder was burning with the steady, insistent urgency of something that wanted his attention. He didn't give it any. He crossed the warehouse floor toward the catwalk stairs. Victoria grabbed his arm from behind. "Logan, stay here," he said. "You're hit. Stay here with the team." He went up the stairs. The catwalk was old steel mesh, suspended 20 feet above the warehouse floor on welded brackets, running the full width of the building. Cross was already halfway across it when Logan hit the top of the stairs. Moving fast for his size, his overcoat flapping, the gun gone, dropped somewhere below when the federal team came in and it became a liability rather than an asset. Logan moved across the catwalk. It swayed slightly under the combined weight, not alarmingly, but enough to feel, and the sound of it was a low rhythmic creak against the ambient noise from below. Cross reached the far end and found what Logan had already registered when he'd mapped the space from the floor. The catwalk ended at a platform that had once given access to an upper storage level, but the storage level's access door had been welded shut at some point during the building's decommissioning. A dead end, 20 feet above the concrete floor. Cross turned. He was breathing hard. the exertion of a man who hadn't needed to run in a long time and whose body was reminding him of that. He looked at Logan across the 15 feet of swaying catwalk between them, and the look on his face was one Logan had seen before. Not on a man like Cross specifically, but on a version of a man like Cross. The look that happens when someone has spent so long being the one who corners people that they genuinely don't have the internal equipment for being cornered themselves. "You're bleeding," Cross said. "I'm aware," Logan said. "Just—" Cross put one hand out, a strange, almost involuntary gesture. "Just stay back." "I'm not going to hurt you," Logan said. Cross laughed. The sound of it was wrong, thin, almost involuntary. "Right. I'm not," Logan said. He kept his voice even. He kept his position on the catwalk. "I don't need to. You're done, Brandon. Everything you built down there," he gestured slightly toward the floor below, "is already in federal custody. The LLCs, the money flow, Holt's access badge, Diane's testimony, the encrypted message. You walked in here tonight and you handed them a kidnapping charge on top of everything else. There is no version of tonight where you don't end up in a room with federal prosecutors." He paused. "All that's left is how you get off this catwalk." Cross stared at him. His hand was still on the railing, knuckles white, Logan could see from here. "You pulled the baton on me this morning," Logan said. "You had my garage broken into. You threatened my daughter's custody. You had this woman taken—" He paused. "I'm not saying any of that didn't happen. I'm saying it's accounted for. The law has it. You don't need me to hurt you for any of that to matter." Something moved in Cross's face. A complicated thing. Not remorse exactly, not that, but maybe something adjacent to the recognition of what remorse would feel like for a man who'd spent long enough avoiding it that the feeling was unfamiliar. Then the catwalk bracket gave. Not all of it. One of the welded support brackets on the far platform, weakened by 2 years of neglect and the sudden dynamic load of 2 men on a structure not designed for this use, pulled partially free from the wall mounting with a sound like a shot. The platform lurched. Cross grabbed the railing with both hands as the catwalk tilted 6 inches toward the warehouse floor below, and then the momentum held it there. Not falling, but not stable, the whole assembly vibrating with the tension of a bracket half torn from a wall. Cross was on the tilted section. His weight was on the railing, and the railing was the only thing between him and the floor. "Hayes," he said. His voice was different now, stripped. Logan was already moving. He crossed the tilted section of catwalk carefully, feeling the structure's instability in his feet, the specific wrongness of a surface that is no longer trustworthy, and reached Cross in 3 steps. He got one hand around Cross's forearm and the other on the back of his collar, braced his own feet against the nearest stable bracket, and held. His left shoulder screamed. He held anyway. "Let go of the rail," Logan said. "I have you." "If you drop me—" "I'm not going to drop you." He didn't say it to be reassuring. He said it because it was a fact, and because Logan Hayes did not drop people, not even people who had earned it, because that was not who he was, and it was not who he intended to become, regardless of what they'd done. "Let go and move toward me, slowly." Cross moved. The catwalk shifted twice more as they worked back across it, each shift small but significant, Logan's grip not releasing, his shoulder a constant fire. He managed the way you manage pain when there is no alternative, by deciding it belongs to a category of information rather than a category of experience, something to note and compensate for rather than to feel. They reached the stable section, then the stairs. Logan brought Cross down the stairs with one hand still on his arm and walked him across the warehouse floor to where Detective Reed was standing with 3 federal agents, and Logan put Cross's arm into Reed's grip and stepped back. Reed looked at Logan's shoulder, at the dark stain spreading through the canvas jacket. "You're hit." "Grazing," Logan said. "It needs attention, but not urgently." "That's not what urgently means," Reed said. "Marcus." Logan looked at him steadily. "Did you get his voice on the transmitter?" Reed held his gaze. Then a corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but the involuntary acknowledgement that something had gone right. He reached into his jacket and produced a small device, the size of a thumb drive. "Full confession," he said. "Transmitted live. The cameras in here caught the rest." He paused. "We have everything." Logan nodded. Victoria was beside him. He hadn't heard her come across the floor, but she was there, and she looked at his shoulder and then looked at his face with that direct, composed expression that was becoming one of the things he recognized her by. "I told you to stay back," Logan said. "I know," she said. "I decided not to." He looked at her, looked at the warehouse around them, the lights now on, the federal team working, Cross standing with his hands being cuffed behind his back with a thoroughness that suggested nobody was taking any chances. Diane Solis outside somewhere, Reed speaking into his radio. The whole exhausted, complicated, imperfect resolution of something that had started 24 hours ago with a quiet man drinking cold coffee, alone. His shoulder hurt. He was tired in the specific, marrow-deep way of someone who had been alert for 20 straight hours. He was thinking about Cora at Mrs. Pham's, probably asleep by now, her homework finished, her sneakers still for the night. "You need an ambulance," Victoria said. "Yeah," he said. He didn't argue about it. Some things you just accept. Outside, the October night was cold and clear, and the sirens were already coming, and Logan Hayes stood on the concrete in his torn and blood-stained canvas jacket and let the EMT who arrived first press a trauma pad to his shoulder, and he answered their questions in the flat, quiet, factual way he answered everything. And he did not feel like a hero because he had never once in his life understood what that word was supposed to mean when applied to a person who had simply done what the situation required and tried very hard not to make it worse than it needed to be. That was all. That was enough. The shoulder needed 7 stitches and a night in the hospital, which Logan spent mostly awake in the specific fluorescent-lit purgatory of a ward room at 3 a.m., watching the ceiling and listening to the buildings settle around him the way old buildings do, and thinking about nothing in particular because sometimes the mind, after enough consecutive hours of high-intensity focus, simply refuses to produce coherent thought and offers texture instead, the sound of the catwalk, the weight of Cross's arm, the burning line across his shoulder that had been upgraded from grazing to a partial thickness laceration by the ER doctor who stitched it. A young woman who'd looked at the wound and then looked at Logan with the specific expression of medical professionals who have stopped being surprised by what people do to each other. Reed came by at 7 a.m. with coffee from the hospital's ground floor vending machine, which was terrible, and Logan drank it gratefully. "Cross is in federal custody," Reed said, settling into the chair beside the bed, with the unhurried quality of a man who had also not slept, but had long since made peace with that as a professional condition. His attorney showed up at 11 last night and tried to get a bail hearing scheduled for this morning. The federal prosecutor's office declined. The kidnapping charge alone is sufficient to hold him, and when you add the financial crimes package, he shook his head slightly. "He's not going anywhere." "His men?" Logan asked. "The 3 inside the warehouse are all cooperating independently, which is what happens when 3 people get arrested at the same time and each one thinks the others are already talking." Reed allowed himself a small, dry satisfaction about this. Holt, the inside contact, turned himself in at 6 this morning. His attorney negotiated a cooperation agreement before he walked through the door. He's already given us the full account of how he accessed the archive and who directed him. Cross directly? Cross directly. Voice messages. Holt saved them. Reed looked at Logan. He saved them because he got nervous about 3 weeks ago when Cross's demands started escalating and he wanted insurance. He's not a good person, but he's a practical one. Logan thought about that. The strange ecosystem of loyalty that formed around men like Brandon Cross. The way it was always conditional and always, eventually, dissolved under sufficient pressure because it was never built on anything real. It was built on fear and self-interest, which were durable materials up to a point, and then catastrophically brittle. "The forgery," Logan said. "The planted documents. Forensics confirmed. The paper fiber, the printer, Holt's access log, and his testimony, all consistent. The federal prosecutor is formally withdrawing any reference to you as a person of interest in the corporate document theft investigation." Reed reached into his jacket pocket and produced a folded sheet of paper. "I also have a letter from the district attorney's office. The assault complaint Cross filed against you yesterday morning. It's been withdrawn. Given that it was filed in bad faith as part of an orchestrated scheme, they're looking at adding an obstruction charge." He set the paper on the bed beside Logan. "You're clear, Hayes, completely." Logan looked at the paper. He didn't pick it up immediately. He'd learned in 12 years of situations that resolved themselves that the resolution never felt the way you expected it to while you were inside the situation. You imagined relief would feel clean and immediate. What it actually felt like was something slower, a gradual loosening of something you'd been holding tightly for long enough that you'd forgotten you were holding it. "Diane," he said, "she's home. She gave a full statement last night. She's a good witness, clear and consistent. She saw Holt accessing the archive room, saw him leave with a bag, and reported it to the only person she trusted, which happened to be the CEO of the company." Reed paused. "She said she almost didn't call. She said she went home and sat for an hour deciding whether it was worth it." He was quiet for a moment. "It was." Logan nodded. "Your custody hearing," Reed said. "I spoke with the family court office this morning. Given the complete withdrawal of the charges and the official documentation that you were the target of a fabricated criminal scheme, they're treating the flagged investigation as a nullity. Your parental rights were never actually in jeopardy under law. The complaint wasn't formalized enough to trigger formal review. But your attorney should make sure the record reflects the withdrawal clearly." He looked at Logan steadily. "Your daughter is fine. Your life is fine. I wanted you to hear that from me directly." Logan was quiet for a moment. "Thank you," he said. It came out plainly, without elaboration, which was the only register in which Logan Hayes was capable of genuine gratitude. "Don't thank me," Reed said. "You did most of it. I was discharged at 10 that morning with a prescription for antibiotics and instructions to rest the shoulder for 2 weeks that he acknowledged and had no real intention of following to the letter. Victoria was waiting in the hospital lobby, not in a way that announced itself, not pacing or visibly anxious, but sitting in one of the chairs near the entrance with her phone in her hand and her coat on, in the manner of someone who had been there long enough to be comfortable but hadn't told anyone she was coming. Logan stopped when he saw her. He hadn't expected her. She stood up. She looked at the sling the hospital had given him for the shoulder, a practical thing in beige nylon that did nothing for his general aesthetic, and then she looked at his face with an expression that was tired around the edges in a way he hadn't seen on her before. The composure was still there, but thinner, like paint on old wood where the grain shows through. "You didn't have to come," he said. "I know," she said. They went outside into the October morning, which was cleaner and sharper than the previous 2 days had been. The kind of autumn morning that feels like the city has been rinsed, everything in too bright focus. They stood on the hospital steps for a moment without purpose. "Reed told me this morning," Victoria said. "Everything. The formal withdrawal, Holt's cooperation, all of it." She looked out at the street. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't been in that cafe." "Someone else would have handled it," Logan said. "No," she said, not unkindly, but with the particular firmness of someone who has thought this through. "Someone else might have called security. They would have filed an incident report. Brandon would have left and come back the next day through a different door." She turned to look at him. "You were the only person in that room who understood what was actually happening." Logan didn't argue with her, partly because arguing wasn't something he did reflexively, and partly because he wasn't sure she was wrong. "How's the company?" he asked. The shift in her expression was subtle, a kind of wry, exhausted recognition that life had already moved back to practical ground. "The board knows everything. I had a full briefing with them last night after the warehouse. There were some difficult questions about why I hadn't brought them in sooner, which is fair. Some of them are angry. Most of them are relieved." She paused. "The licensing agreement is still on the table. The other party's legal team reached out this morning to confirm they're not withdrawing, so..." She made a small gesture. "We continue." "Good," Logan said. She looked at him. "What about you?" "Me. What do you do now, after all of this?" He considered the question honestly, the way the morning after something tends to make you consider things. He thought about the consulting job that had started and ended in less than 48 hours while becoming something else entirely. He thought about Cora at Mrs. Pham's. He thought about the small house in the Millhaven district and the cold yard between it and Mrs. Pham's back door, and the way the kitchen looked at 2 a.m. with the lights low and a cup of coffee he hadn't drunk. "I pick up my daughter," he said. Victoria smiled. It was the first time he'd seen her actually smile, not the controlled professional version, not the expression she used to manage rooms, but an actual unguarded smile that moved her whole face. It lasted only a second before she pulled it back, but he'd seen it. Yes, she said. Do that. Cora came through Mrs. Pham's front door at 11:15 with her backpack over one shoulder and her coat half zipped, and a piece of Mrs. Pham's sesame candy in her hand, and when she saw Logan standing in the yard, she stopped for a full second before she walked to him, and he crouched down and she put her arms around his neck, careful of the sling without being told, in the way of a child who has grown up paying attention to the physical reality of her parent. You called every night, she said into his collar. I said I would. She pulled back and looked at the sling. Does it hurt? A little. How little? Not much. She looked at him the way she looked at things she was deciding whether to believe. Then she looked at the sling again. Can you still cook dinner? Probably not spaghetti, he said, but most things. Mrs. Pham made me congee, Cora said. She puts ginger in it. It's actually really good. I'll take notes, Logan said. He drove her home with the window cracked the way she liked it in autumn and the radio on a station she chose, something with too much bass that she turned down slightly when she noticed him wince, without being asked, without making a production of it. She told him about her homework and about a situation with her friend Amara that she'd resolved by the second day with a frankness that he thought was probably better conflict resolution than most adults managed. And he listened, and the specific ordinary weight of it, the bass-heavy music, the half-zipped coat, the ginger congee, the Amara situation, settled around him like something returning to its natural position after being displaced. There were things he'd have to manage in the coming weeks. Paperwork, formal statements, follow-up with the federal investigation as a witness. His attorney had called twice that morning, and he'd need to return those calls. The consulting arrangement with Aurora Dynamics was technically unresolved. He'd never actually completed the security assessment he'd been hired to do, having instead spent 2 days preventing a corporate extortion scheme, which was arguably more valuable but also not what was on the contract. He had stitches in his shoulder and antibiotics to take, and 2 weeks of modified activity that he was already mentally negotiating down to 10 days. None of that was urgent. All of that could wait. He made eggs for dinner because that was what the shoulder allowed, and Cora ate them without complaint and told him about a book she was reading for school. And after dinner, she did the dishes without being asked, which she did sometimes when she could tell he was tired, and Logan stood in the kitchen doorway watching her and felt that familiar weight that was not a burden but a ballast, the thing that kept him oriented in the correct direction regardless of what was happening around him. The trial of Brandon Cross began 4 months later and lasted 11 days. Logan testified on the third day. He sat in the witness stand in a courtroom on the 7th floor of the federal building and answered the prosecutor's questions in the same flat, factual register he used for everything: the cafe, the baton, the catwalk, the warehouse. He described each event chronologically and without editorializing. When Cross's defense attorney attempted to reframe the cafe incident as an aggressive intervention rather than a protective one, Logan answered each question directly and did not take the bait of the framing, because taking bait was something he'd never found useful. The defense attorney was a skilled professional doing a difficult job for a client whose recorded voice had confessed to the specifics of his own criminal scheme, and Logan had some professional respect for the effort, even as he declined to make it easier. Diane Solis testified on the 5th day. She was precise and clear, and she cried once, briefly, during cross-examination when the defense suggested she might have misidentified the archive room, and then she collected herself and corrected the record without heat. And Logan, watching from the gallery, thought she was probably one of the more genuinely courageous people in the building that day. Marcus the barista testified on the 6th day. His account hadn't changed by a single word from his original statement, which Logan had expected. Alan Ferris, the witness who had changed his statement under Cross's pressure, appeared on the 7th day as a reluctant prosecution witness with an immunity agreement. It was visibly uncomfortable for the full duration of his testimony, which was appropriate, and his account of being approached by one of Cross's men in the hour after the cafe incident and told what to say to the police corroborated what Logan and Reed had concluded from the beginning. On the 11th day, after 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. Attempted kidnapping, extortion, criminal conspiracy, obstruction of justice, unlawful weapons possession, multiple counts of financial fraud and money laundering across a 6-year period covering the 4 previous acquisition targets and Aurora Dynamics. The counts came in one by one, the foreperson reading them in a voice that was careful and even and each one landed in the courtroom with the particular weight of a door closing on something that had been open too long. Logan sat in the gallery and listened. He didn't feel triumphant. He never felt triumphant about things like this, about the formal conclusion of something that had already cost people real things before it got to a courtroom. Diane Solis had lost 6 months of sleep and would probably lose more. Gerald Huang had lost a company he'd built for 15 years and never fully recovered it. Reyes had rebuilt, but differently, with less trust in the world than she'd had before, which was a loss that didn't appear on any document but was real. The system had worked, eventually. That mattered. But eventually was doing a lot of work in that sentence, and Logan wasn't built for the kind of satisfaction that ignored the distance between when something went wrong and when something was made right. Victoria was sitting 3 rows ahead of him in the gallery. She didn't look back when the verdict came in, but he saw her shoulders drop. Not collapsing, just releasing. The controlled exhale of someone who has been holding a particular breath for 7 months and has finally been given permission to stop. The custody hearing was 10 days after the verdict, a procedural formality given the formal record of the withdrawn investigation. But Logan sat in the family court waiting room for 40 minutes beforehand, with his hands on his knees in a specific low-grade tension that he acknowledged as disproportionate to the actual legal situation and couldn't entirely rationalize away. Some things bypassed the part of the brain that processed risk rationally and went directly to something older and more fundamental. His attorney, a small and precise woman named Yolanda Torres, who had handled his case with what he considered to be the appropriate combination of competence and no nonsense about it, sat beside him and went over the documentation one more time, not because it needed going over again, but because she could see he needed something to do. "You're fine," she said. "The record is clean. The withdrawal is formalized. The judge has read the federal prosecutor's letter. This is a formality." "I know," Logan said. "You don't look like someone who knows." "I look like this about most things," Logan said. The hearing lasted 22 minutes. The judge, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain and the manner of someone who had been doing this long enough to have no patience for theater, reviewed the record, asked Logan 2 direct questions about the sequence of events and his current employment status, listened to his answers, and ruled. Full parental rights confirmed, no modification to existing custody arrangement. The flagged investigation noted and formally treated as a nullity in the record. Logan said thank you. The judge nodded once, already moving to the next file. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Yolanda Torres shook his hand. "Congratulations," she said. "Now please go do something that doesn't involve federal investigations." "I'll try," Logan said. 3 months after that, Victoria called him about a foundation. She'd been talking about it since before the trial. The idea of something structured, something that did more than exist as a reaction to what had happened. She'd spoken with the founders of 2 of Cross's previous target companies, including Reyes, and she'd spent considerable time with a nonprofit attorney working through what it would actually take to create an organization that helped small and mid-sized businesses navigate exactly the kind of predatory acquisition pressure that had nearly destroyed Aurora Dynamics. "Legal support," she told him, sitting across from his desk in the small office he'd set up in the Millhaven district after the consulting work had, somewhat to his surprise, expanded into a small firm. "Financial consultation. Security assessment for companies that don't have the resources to hire independent consultants." She looked at him. "The security component needs someone who knows what they're doing." Logan looked at her across the desk. The October light had turned February, and the window behind him framed a gray afternoon sky, and Victoria Sinclair sat in the chair across from him, the way she sat in most chairs, with a kind of considered ease that he'd come to understand was not effortlessness, but was the product of considerable internal effort, the practiced poise of a person who had made a decision a long time ago about how she wanted to move through the world. "I have a business," he said. "You have 3 employees and a lease that's month to month," she said, which is not a criticism, it's a description. "It's accurate," he admitted. "The foundation isn't asking you to give up the business. We're asking for partnership, advisory structure. Your firm gets contracted through us for assessments, which means you get paying work and we get someone who's actually good at it." She paused. "And you'd be on the foundation's board." "I don't know anything about being on a board." "I'll teach you," she said. "You taught me what a planned hostile intimidation looks like. We can call it even." He looked at her for a moment. There was something he'd been thinking about for the past few months. Not something he'd named or examined directly, because it was the kind of thing that examining too directly tended to damage, like pushing on a bruise to see if it still hurt. Something about the specific quality of the ease between them, the way the professional dynamic had shifted without either of them formally acknowledging that it had. The way she'd shown up at the hospital, the way he'd noticed, in the courtroom gallery, exactly where she was sitting. "Okay," he said. She looked at him. "Okay the board? Or okay all of it?" "Both," he said. Something moved across her face, the unguarded thing, the one he'd first seen outside the hospital. She let it stay a little longer this time before she pulled it back. "Good," she said with the briskness that was at least partially performed. "I'll have Daniel send you the paperwork." "Of course you will," Logan said. The community safety workshop started in March, in a rented space in the Millhaven district that had been a dry cleaner and still smelled faintly of industrial solvent, no matter how many times they opened the windows. Logan taught them himself, 2 evenings a week, to whoever showed up. Small business owners, building managers, the occasional concerned resident, once a woman who turned out to be writing a graduate thesis on community security models and took 12 pages of notes. He did not teach people how to fight. He taught them how to see, how to read a situation before it became a problem, how to recognize the early signs of organizational pressure and predatory interest, when to call a lawyer and when to call the police, and when to call neither and simply document, because documentation was the thing that ultimately distinguished survivable situations from ones that weren't. He was not a natural teacher in the performed sense. He didn't have the instinct for theater that made some instructors compelling. What he had was specificity and the ability to stay concrete, and it turned out that was what most people actually needed. Not inspiration. Information. Cora came with him twice, sitting in the back with her homework, while her father stood at the front of a room full of adults and talked about security cameras and paper trails. She watched him in the way she watched things that interested her, with that steady, noting quality she'd had since she was small. On the way home the second time, she said, "Is this better than the Navy?" He thought about it, seriously, the way she expected him to. "It's different," he said. "What's the difference?" He drove for a moment. The Millhaven streets at 9 at night were quiet, a particular, familiar quiet, the quiet of a neighborhood that had been going about its business since before either of them were part of it. "In the Navy," he said, "most of what I did was respond. Something had already gone wrong, and my job was to respond to it, sometimes fast, sometimes before it got worse." He paused. "This is more trying to make sure people know enough that there's less for anyone to respond to." Cora considered this with the gravity she brought to things she was genuinely processing. "Prevention," she said. "That's the word, yeah. Ms. Okafor says that in health class, too." She looked out the window. "She says the best medicine is not getting sick." "Ms. Okafor sounds right," Logan said. Cora pulled her knees up onto the seat, a habit he'd given up correcting, and looked at the side mirror and the street going by in it. "Is Victoria coming to the next one?" she asked, with the specific casual tone of a question that was not as casual as it was pretending to be. Logan looked at the road. "Probably," he said. "She brought good coffee last time," Cora said. "Not gas station coffee." "No," Logan said. "Not gas station." Cora let that sit for a moment. "I like her," she said, plainly as a statement of information. Then she put her earbuds in and went back to whatever she'd been listening to, and the conversation was concluded on her terms, which was usually how conversations with Cora concluded. The foundation launched formally in April, at a small event in the Aurora Dynamics offices that was nothing like a gala. No catering beyond decent coffee and pastries, no speeches longer than 5 minutes, no one performing significance. Victoria spoke briefly and specifically about what the foundation was for and what it wasn't for, and Reed said a few words, and Diane Solis, who had, in the months since the trial, become something of an unofficial ambassador for the whole enterprise, told a short story about why she'd made the phone call she'd made, which was simply that it had seemed wrong not to, and she'd decided that seeming wrong was enough of a reason. Logan stood near the window during most of it, the way he stood in most rooms, and watched the city. Afterward, when most people had gone, Victoria found him there. The city below was still in its late afternoon business, the ordinary machinery of thousands of people going about their days, none of whom knew anything about what had happened in this building 7 months ago, which was exactly right. The world did not need to know. Some things had happened, and they had mattered to the people they mattered to, and that was sufficient. "You're doing the thing," Victoria said. He looked at her. "What thing?" "The scan. The quiet sweep." She made a small gesture with her hand, imitating the careful, even way his eyes moved across a space. She'd described it once before, 3 months ago, and he'd been surprised that she'd noticed it. "Habit," he said. "I know." She stood beside him at the window, close enough that he was aware of the proximity without being unsteady about it. "Does it ever stop?" He considered that honestly. "The automatic version? Probably not. Doesn't bother me. Does it bother you that it doesn't bother you?" It was the kind of question she asked sometimes, sideways, approaching something at an angle, the way a cautious person approaches something they genuinely want to know. He'd noticed that about her over the past months. She asked direct questions about everything except the things that mattered most to her, which she approached carefully. "No," he said. "I think it's just part of how I'm put together. Some things you carry differently, not lighter, just integrated." She was quiet for a moment, looking at the city. "I've been thinking about something," she said. He waited. "I've been thinking that everything that happened, starting from the cafe, it was the worst several days of my professional life, possibly my entire life, and I would—" She stopped, restarted. "I wouldn't undo it. I know that sounds like a strange thing to say, but the things that came out of it, Reed's investigation, the foundation, Diane." She paused. "You." The last word landed without drama. She hadn't built to it. She'd just arrived there honestly, the way she did most things when she dropped the professional register. Logan looked at her profile against the window light. The city behind her. 7 months of knowing her. In crisis first, which was, he'd come to think, not the worst way to know someone. Crisis was clarifying. It showed you what a person was built from in a way that normal circumstances didn't. What Victoria Sinclair was built from, he'd had considerable opportunity to observe, was exactly what she appeared to be. Not without fear, not without doubt, not without the ordinary human frailties that made her sometimes over-prepare and sometimes hold her composure so tightly it became its own kind of pressure, but fundamentally honest and fundamentally stubborn about the things she'd decided mattered. It was not a small thing to be that person under the circumstances she'd faced. "I've been thinking about something too," he said. She looked at him. "Cora said she likes you," he said. "She mentioned the coffee." Victoria's expression moved through confusion and then arrived at the unguarded thing, the real smile, the one that moved her whole face and lasted longer this time than it had before. "The coffee is important," she said. "To her, yes," Logan said. "She has strong feelings about coffee for a 9-year-old. "She told me," Victoria said. "We talked about it for about 10 minutes one evening while you were in the other room on a call." "I know," Logan said. "She reported the conversation to me in detail on the way home." The smile stayed. "What did she report?" "That you'd both agreed gas station coffee was a character flaw, specifically mine." Victoria laughed, an actual laugh, short and genuine, the kind that escapes before you can manage it. She turned back to the window, but she was still smiling, the city below them doing its indifferent and necessary business. "Logan," she said. "Yeah. I'd like to have dinner with you. Not a board meeting, not a debrief. Dinner." She said it the way she said things she'd already decided about, directly, without dressing it up. "If that's something you want." He looked at the city, at the October afternoon that had become February, and then April, and was now warming towards something else. At the 7 months of arriving here from a cafe where a quiet man had set down a cup of cold coffee and stood up at the right moment for reasons that had seemed simple at the time and had turned out to be anything but. "Yeah," he said, "that's something I want." She nodded once, with the contained satisfaction of someone who has confirmed a decision rather than made a new one. Then she turned back to the room where Daniel was collecting coffee cups and Reed was saying goodbye to Diane Solis, and the Foundation's first day was drawing to its ordinary, undramatic close. Logan stayed at the window another minute. He wasn't scanning anymore. He was just looking at the particular quality of the light at this hour, the city receding into its evening, The ordinary fact of people moving below him toward their homes and their families and their next ordinary days. He thought about something one of his instructors had said a long time ago, in a different life. A man named Garza who had the specific and unglamorous wisdom of someone who'd seen too much to be impressed by drama. He'd said, "The measure of a man is not what he does when everything is at stake. Everyone finds something in themselves when the stakes are absolute. The measure is what he does when the stakes are small, when nobody's watching, when it's easier not to." Logan wasn't sure he agreed entirely or that it was a clean distinction, but he thought about it sometimes. He thought about the café, the cold coffee, the 12 feet of floor between a bar stool and a corner table, the choice that hadn't felt like a choice at all, just the next right thing in a sequence where the next right thing was all he'd ever been able to identify one step at a time. That was all it had ever been. Not heroism, not strategy, just the accumulated weight of small choices made consistently in the same direction over a long enough time that they started to look, from the outside, like a person of a particular kind. He was not sure he was that person on all his best days. He was sure he was trying to be, which was the only version of certainty that held up under any real examination. He turned from the window, crossed the room, held the door for Daniel, who was carrying too many coffee cups, and thanked him without looking up, nodded to Reed, who was still talking to Diane, and raised 2 fingers in a small salute without breaking his sentence. He took the elevator down, walked through the lobby of Sterling Tower, and pushed out through the glass doors into the April afternoon. Cora was with Mrs. Pham until 6. He had 90 minutes. He bought a coffee from the cart on the corner, not gas station, not $9 espresso, something in between that was decent and warm. And he walked, no destination, no scan, just the city and the afternoon and the reasonable, grounded weight of a life that was imperfect and ongoing and completely, sufficiently his.